There's a moment before every collapse when someone tells you exactly what's about to happen, and you don't realize the weight of it until it's already over. I'm about to disappear on you. I'm done playing games. That wasn't a threat. It was a forecast. And now, that voice sits at the center of what may be one of the most calculated public unravelings hip-hop has ever seen. Because the line between justice and revenge hasn't just blurred anymore, it's been obliterated. And standing at the center of that wreckage is Curtis 50 Cent Jackson, executive producer of Netflix's explosive docu-series Sean Combs, The Reckoning. This isn't being treated like a normal documentary. Behind the scenes, insiders describe it as a methodical dismantling, a project designed not to investigate, but to expose, using one weapon above all else: Sean Combs' own voice. At the heart of the series are alleged private recordings, captured just 6 days before Combs' arrest. Not rumors. Not secondhand testimony. Actual footage of a man spiraling as his world begins to close in. The tapes reportedly show Combs barricaded inside a Harlem hotel room, surrounded by lawyers, issuing rapid-fire commands while the walls cave in. His tone shifts from confident to frantic in minutes. At one point, he admits something that cracks the image he's spent decades perfecting. "We're losing." That sentence alone does damage most publicists can't undo. But then comes the moment that truly reframes everything. Combs is heard saying he needs someone who understands the dirtiest business of media and propaganda. That isn't denial. That's strategy. It reveals a man who knew the courtroom wasn't the real battlefield. He understood that public perception would decide his fate long before a judge ever spoke. And now, that admission isn't buried in a private archive. It's streaming on Netflix. Here's where the story takes a brutal turn. According to multiple reports, Combs recorded all of this himself. For years, decades, even he documented his life obsessively. Studio sessions, private gatherings, emotional moments, arguments, breakdowns. The belief was simple: if everything is recorded, nothing can be used against you. But control only works if you keep it. And Combs lost it. Netflix claims the footage used in The Reckoning was legally obtained and independently verified. The production team insists the recordings are authentic, vetted, and protected under the law. The footage allegedly captures Combs barking orders into his phone, reaching out to crisis fixers, and scrambling to contain accusations already spinning out of reach. This isn't a man preparing his defense. This is a man trying to stop a flood. And standing just outside the frame is 50 Cent. Because this series isn't happening in a vacuum. It's the latest chapter in a feud that's been building quietly for over 2 decades. The tension between 50 and Combs has always been public, but now it's operational. Sources close to the production claim Jackson didn't accidentally find these tapes. He allegedly paid for access, using contacts inside Combs' inner circle, people who knew exactly what existed and where it was stored. The irony is ruthless. Combs allegedly planned to turn this same footage into his own legacy project one day, a tell-all that would frame his life on his terms. He had been recording since he was a teenager, convinced that controlling the archive meant controlling history. Instead, someone else got there first. 50 Cent flipped Combs' own documentation into a public weapon, releasing it at the exact moment Combs could least respond. Because as this series drops, Combs is already behind bars, serving a 50-month sentence in a low-security New Jersey facility. Appeals are pending. Civil lawsuits are multiplying. Allegations of coercion and long-term exploitation continue stacking. And while he's locked away, his most vulnerable moments are being broadcast worldwide. Netflix insists this isn't an attack. Combs' legal team strongly disagrees. They've issued cease and desist letters, accusing the streamer of using stolen material and violating serious legal boundaries, including attorney-client privilege. Netflix isn't backing down. Director Alexandria Stapleton has publicly stated the footage was obtained lawfully and that protections were put in place to safeguard sources. Two sides. No retreat. But this isn't about legal language anymore. It's about perception. And the perception is devastating. The documentary doesn't just revisit allegations, it frames them as part of a long-running pattern. A system built on power, influence, and the belief that consequences could always be managed. Then comes the family angle. Combs' children, especially his twins, have stood beside him in court, presenting a united front. Emotional pleas. Visible loyalty. A powerful image of family solidarity. But insiders say the documentary hit his inner circle hard. Unconfirmed but persistent reports suggest his children were shaken after viewing early cuts, particularly the meltdown footage. These are the same kids who defended him publicly just months earlier. Now they're forced to confront two versions of the same man. The father they know, and the figure unraveling on screen. And the timing of this release feels anything but accidental. It lands as appeals are prepared, as new lawsuits surface. As public fascination with Combs' downfall reaches a peak, every episode feels deliberate, which leads to the question that refuses to disappear. Is this accountability? Or is this the final move in a personal war? Because if this is only part one, if these tapes are just the opening reveal, then the most dangerous material may still be hidden. And whoever controls it controls what comes next. The most dangerous lie powerful people tell themselves is this: if I record everything, I control everything. For years, Sean Combs lived by that rule. Cameras followed him like shadows. Audio recorders stayed rolling long after conversations were supposed to end. To outsiders, it looked obsessive. To insiders, it was insurance. Because when you own the footage, you own the story. Or so he thought. What The Reckoning makes painfully clear is that the vault Combs built to protect himself eventually became a liability. A massive digital archive, hours of raw, unfiltered access, waiting for the wrong person to get a key. And according to sources close to the production, that key didn't come from hackers or law enforcement. It came from inside the house. Former employees. Disgruntled partners. People who once depended on Combs for money, access, or protection until that relationship collapsed. When loyalty is fueled by fear, it doesn't survive the moment fear shifts direction. Because once Combs' legal troubles escalated, the calculation changed. Silence stopped feeling safe. This is where the documentary pivots from personal collapse to strategic exposure. Multiple insiders allege that 50 Cent didn't stumble into this archive. He allegedly followed whispers, long-standing rumors that Combs recorded everything. Studio sessions were only a fraction. Private meetings. Emotional breakdowns, heated arguments, all preserved. The reason no one touched it for years was simple. The footage wasn't just incriminating for Combs. It implicated proximity. If those recordings ever surfaced, they wouldn't just show one man losing control. They would show who stood beside him while it happened. That's why, according to industry sources, the negotiations were quiet. No headlines. No leaks. Just conversations with people who understood exactly what they were sitting on and exactly what it could be worth. By the time Netflix entered the picture, the damage was already baked in. The series makes a chilling point. The most revealing material isn't the accusations, it's the tone. Combs doesn't sound confused or blindsided in the recordings. He sounds prepared, calculated, fully aware that storms were coming. In one segment, he's heard discussing how narratives are shaped, not in courtrooms but online. He talks about timing, optics, distraction cycles. About burying stories before they gain oxygen. This isn't someone denying wrongdoing. This is someone managing fallout. And that distinction matters. Because it reframes decades of allegations not as isolated events, but as incidents that survived because they were strategically controlled. The documentary also highlights something even more uncomfortable: how many people allegedly helped enforce that control. Fixers, gatekeepers, legal intermediaries, media allies, individuals whose job wasn't to ask questions, but to make problems disappear. The series never names them directly. It doesn't have to. The implication alone does enough damage. As part 2 unfolds, the focus widens beyond Combs himself and into the ecosystem that allowed him to operate. The culture of silence. The rewards of loyalty. The cost of dissent. Several former associates describe a pattern. Those who stayed quiet were elevated. Those who spoke out were sidelined, discredited, or erased from opportunity. That system didn't require explicit threats. It ran on understanding. And when understanding breaks, archives become weapons. Meanwhile, Combs' legal situation continues tightening. While serving his sentence, he's fighting multiple fronts: appeals, civil suits, reputational collapse. Each new release from the documentary complicates that battle. His legal team has tried to frame the series as exploitation. They argue the timing is cruel, that releasing footage while he's incarcerated removes his ability to respond effectively. Netflix's response is firm. They argue the public interest outweighs personal discomfort, especially when the material consists of Combs' own recordings. That argument lands differently depending on who's watching. Some viewers see justice. Others see blood in the water. But no one sees coincidence. Because every episode drops with surgical precision. And the pressure isn't just external anymore. Inside Combs' circle, fractures are widening. Longtime allies have gone quiet. Industry figures once eager to be photographed with him now act like proximity never existed. Photos vanish. Mentions stop. Invitations dry up. It's the modern version of exile. Not announced, just enforced. The documentary also raises a disturbing possibility that Combs believed these recordings would protect him legally. That documenting everything created leverage, proof that he wasn't alone in rooms, that others participated, witnessed, benefited. If that's true, then releasing the footage does more than expose Combs. It destabilizes everyone connected to it. And that may explain why the release strategy is slow, measured, controlled. Not everything at once, because fear spreads faster than footage. By the end of part 2, one realization becomes unavoidable. This vault wasn't opened accidentally. It was opened deliberately, by someone who knew exactly what was inside and exactly when to let the world see it. And as the series hints toward what remains unreleased, the question shifts from why this is happening to who is next. Because if this archive goes deeper, if the tapes extend beyond Combs, then this story isn't just about a fallen mogul. It's about an industry that may not survive full daylight. Combs' personal panic is no longer isolated. His empire, the carefully curated image of power, control, and untouchable influence, is starting to fracture under the weight of exposure. The meltdown tapes reveal more than stress. They expose a strategy unraveling in real time. Combs isn't just anxious. He's calculating. Every call, every direction, every frantic order is designed to protect what he has left. But there's a problem. No amount of planning can stop a narrative once it's out of the vault. Every recording is a piece of evidence. Every word becomes part of a larger pattern. And as the reckoning meticulously shows, those patterns aren't random. They suggest a life constructed around control, leverage, and influence, often over people who had no choice but to comply. The series dives into financial maneuvers, alleged payoffs, and the movement of assets overseas just days before Combs' arrest. Nothing is explicitly claimed, but the implications hang heavy. If true, these actions could have consequences far beyond a single arrest. They hint at systemic strategies to protect wealth, evade exposure, and maintain dominance in the industry. And the human cost is undeniable. While Combs' children and family publicly stand by him, the documentary paints a more complicated picture. Witnesses, insiders, and former associates report emotional strain, confusion, and shock after seeing early footage. The contrast is stark. The man defended in court and the man recorded pleading for control are almost unrecognizable as the same person. The series also delves into personal relationships. The infamous Daphne Joy saga, for example, isn't background drama. It's a lens into Combs' alleged pattern of control. Audio leaks, reports of financial stipends, and strategic manipulation all converge to show a man operating on leverage, not love or loyalty. Each story isn't isolated. They stack together, building a portrait of influence wielded as power, sometimes at others' expense. The broader narrative question looms: how many others were complicit? Former associates, staff, media contacts, people whose silence allowed patterns to continue unchecked. The documentary doesn't need to name everyone. The implication alone destabilizes the web surrounding Combs, leaving viewers to wonder just how wide the reach of his influence really was. And while these patterns emerge, 50 Cent's strategy becomes impossible to ignore. He doesn't comment. He doesn't attack. He simply releases the content strategically, letting Combs' own words carry the narrative. Every piece of footage lands with precision. The sequence of episodes, the timing of releases, the selective highlighting of moments, all orchestrated to maximize impact. The result: Combs' empire begins to crack before the world in a way that can't be repaired with PR. Legal battles continue in parallel. Combs' team challenges Netflix's right to air the recordings, especially those involving attorney-client communications. Cease and desist letters are sent. Threats of further legal action are implied. Netflix maintains its stance. The material is lawfully obtained and of significant public interest. The tension between legal and public perception escalates. Inside Combs' inner circle, loyalty begins to falter. Former allies quietly distance themselves. Invitations stop. Public appearances disappear. In the digital age, absence is a statement. And the statement is unmistakable. Proximity is dangerous. As the series digs deeper, viewers see something even more unsettling: the pre-arrest strategy sessions recorded by Combs. His tone swings wildly, confidence one moment, desperation the next. His obsession with controlling narrative, managing optics, and planning responses reveals a man caught between arrogance and vulnerability, trapped by his own meticulous documentation. And that obsession is precisely what makes the footage so effective in the documentary. By the end of Part 3, it's clear. Combs' personal meltdown isn't the story anymore. The empire itself is being tested. And viewers are left with a chilling realization: if the tapes we've seen are just the tip of the iceberg, what else is waiting in the vault? If more exists, material tied to private gatherings, high-profile figures, and untold interactions, then the consequences could ripple far beyond one man's reputation. Allies could fall. Careers could unravel. The culture itself could face exposure it never anticipated. The final question looms, unresolved: who is next if the remaining content ever surfaces? Because one thing is undeniable: the reckoning has only just begun. This is about power under siege, the fallout of decades spent building an empire without accountability, and the consequences of one man's obsession with control. Combs' empire was vast. Music, fashion, media, influence in every corner of entertainment. Yet the documentary emphasizes a critical flaw: the higher he rose, the more fragile the foundations became. Every success, every crown, relied on control over people, over narrative, over perception. And the tapes show that control was never as absolute as he believed. In these recordings, Combs is meticulous, strategic, almost clinical. He discusses damage control, contingency plans, and the need to enlist fixers who understand the darkest corners of media. But his voice cracks. Panic seeps through. Vulnerability punctures the carefully maintained facade. The man who once seemed untouchable now seems human. Flawed. Cornered. The documentary frames these moments not as isolated incidents, but as part of a pattern of behavior stretching back decades. It highlights allegations of coercion, influence over partners and associates, and calculated manipulation of circumstances to maintain power. The personal is political. And in Combs' world, personal strategy was indistinguishable from professional dominance. Meanwhile, legal complications multiply. Civil suits continue to pile up. Allegations aren't just resurfacing, they're converging. And behind the cameras, law enforcement interest is reportedly ongoing, suggesting federal scrutiny may not have fully ended. Every pre-arrest decision, every financial maneuver, every conversation in the meltdown tapes could carry consequences far beyond the initial sentencing. Family dynamics intensify the tension. Combs' children have publicly defended him, but the documentary paints a more nuanced picture. Seeing their father in unfiltered, vulnerable moments, sometimes berating associates or pleading for control, forces a confrontation between the man they know and the figure the world sees. It's a stark contrast: Courtroom loyalty versus documentary reality. And that tension reverberates across every episode, keeping viewers engaged and unsettled. The series also revisits Combs' high-profile relationships, including the Daphne-Joy saga. Allegations of financial leverage, coercion, and manipulation are interwoven into the larger narrative of power and influence. These moments aren't presented as sensationalized gossip. They're used to illustrate a broader pattern of behavior, one in which personal and professional spheres are deeply entwined. Then there's the cultural impact. The documentary doesn't just expose Combs' alleged behavior, it forces the audience to reckon with the ecosystem that enabled it. Staff, media contacts, former partners, and insiders all played roles, willingly or under pressure. The series leaves viewers questioning who was complicit, who benefited, and who remained silent out of fear. The series drops episodes as lawsuits progress, as legal appeals loom, as public curiosity reaches a fever pitch. Every release feels calculated, every revelation magnified by context. And as Part 4 closes, one chilling realization emerges. Combs' obsession with recording every interaction, every conversation, every breakdown, once thought to be insurance, has turned into his greatest vulnerability. The vault he created, the archive he built, the meticulous documentation intended to preserve his legacy has become the instrument of his exposure. And as the documentary teases unreleased material, the question becomes impossible to ignore. If what we've seen is this damaging, what's still waiting in the shadows? Because the reckoning isn't over. It's only intensifying. The drama isn't contained within Combs' hotel room or legal filings anymore. It spreads outward, touching associates, family, and the industry at large. The reckoning isn't just a story of one man's unraveling. It's a map of an empire cracking under the strain of exposure. The documentary lays bare the strategic desperation behind Combs' actions. Every frantic call to lawyers, every order to fixers, every behind-the-scenes conversation is part of a man attempting to maintain authority in the midst of chaos. But as the series makes clear, control has a shelf life. When the pressure becomes relentless, strategy collapses into panic. The fallout is multi-layered. Legal battles. Combs faces ongoing civil lawsuits alleging coercion, exploitation, and abuse of influence. His legal team has publicly criticized Netflix for airing the footage, claiming it violates attorney-client privilege and was obtained under dubious circumstances. Meanwhile, federal interest reportedly continues in certain financial dealings, adding another layer of risk. Family impact. Combs' children, while publicly loyal, are confronted with two conflicting versions of their father, the one they defended in court and the one revealed on tape. The emotional toll is palpable. The series subtly suggests that loyalty doesn't erase doubt, and seeing a parent's private vulnerabilities broadcast worldwide can create lasting internal conflict. Associates and insiders. Part 5 highlights how the revelations have shaken Combs' inner circle. Longtime allies are distancing themselves. Connections vanish. Media contacts and former collaborators are publicly silent. The culture of proximity that once elevated careers now threatens them, as the documentary hints at the consequences of being too close to the epicenter. Romantic and personal entanglements. The Daphne-Joy saga is explored in more depth, with leaked recordings and reports of financial leverage framing a pattern of control. Allegations of coercion, strategic payments, and manipulation are presented not as isolated events, but as part of a larger system of influence. The series suggests that personal relationships were tools in maintaining authority over others, raising questions about how power operates behind closed doors. Financial maneuvering. Sources in the documentary claim that Combs moved assets overseas in the days before his arrest. While speculative, the timing is portrayed as highly significant. The series implies a calculated effort to preserve wealth and control, reinforcing the image of a man whose empire was always about more than image. It was about real power and how to protect it. Amid all this, 50 Cent's influence remains a quiet but dominating presence. He didn't need to narrate or comment. The strategic release of the recordings does the work. By letting Combs' own voice reveal desperation, The series transforms raw material into a public reckoning, showing how narrative control can be weaponized when someone else holds the keys. The documentary also explores historical allegations. Former associates and long-standing claims like those surrounding the 1996 Shakur case and other controversial moments in Combs' career are presented not as wild rumors, but as pieces of a pattern. Each incident, when framed alongside the meltdown recordings, suggests consistent behavior spanning decades. The implication is clear: power unchecked invites accountability, eventually and sometimes violently. Then there's the unreleased material, which looms like a specter over the entire series. The documentary hints at additional tapes that could contain even more explosive content: private gatherings, behind-the-scenes interactions, and conversations with high-profile figures who have remained silent. The suggestion is terrifying. If what's already public is this damaging, what remains hidden could rewrite the narrative entirely. By the end of Part 5, the series leaves viewers with an unsettling awareness. Combs' empire is fracturing in public. Allies and associates are retreating. Legal and financial consequences continue to mount. The unreleased vault promises more exposure. And above all, it raises the ultimate question: if this is only part of the story, how far does the reckoning go, and who will it touch next? The series doesn't provide answers. It raises tension. It fuels speculation. It keeps viewers on the edge of their seats, wondering what comes after the dominoes start falling. The takeaway is stark: no empire is untouchable, no narrative unassailable, and no person immune to the consequences of power misused. If the most private moments of Combs' life could be weaponized against him, then what else could emerge from the shadows? The storm is here. The aftershocks are spreading. And the world is watching. The narrative shifts to the aftermath. Sean Combs' world, once meticulously curated, is now laid bare. The recordings, leaked through Netflix's The Reckoning, have reshaped public perception. Fans, critics, insiders, all are forced to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the man revealed in private moments of panic, desperation, and strategic calculation. The documentary doesn't just replay history, it reframes it. Every episode reinforces a central theme: control is fleeting and legacy is fragile. The man who once dictated the narrative now watches as his own words define it. Legal troubles continue to mount. Combs' civil cases proceed, some alleging coercion, some questioning past financial dealings. Appeals linger in the background, but for the public, the unfolding spectacle is the real story. Legal papers may move slowly, but Netflix broadcasts his empire unraveling in real time. Family dynamics remain tense. His children and relatives, once staunch defenders, now confront a dual reality: the father they know versus the man captured on tape, sometimes berating associates, sometimes pleading for leverage. The emotional weight of seeing a parent's vulnerability amplified globally is profound. Loyalty is complicated when transparency exposes contradictions. Meanwhile, former associates are quietly retreating. Media contacts vanish. Friends distance themselves. The ecosystem that once surrounded Combs, built on proximity, loyalty, and fear, is fracturing. Silence is no longer safe. Visibility has become liability. The series also revisits Combs' personal relationships, notably the Daphne Joy saga, the alleged financial stipends, and instances of coercion. Presented as part of a long-standing pattern, these interactions underscore a recurring theme: power was often wielded through manipulation, influence, and transactional relationships. Private becomes public, and what was once discreet is now undeniable. Financial implications linger ominously. Reports suggest Combs moved significant assets overseas just before his arrest. If true, these maneuvers may intersect with ongoing federal scrutiny, hinting that legal exposure is far from complete. The stakes are immense, and every revelation amplifies uncertainty around his empire and personal legacy. And then there's the unreleased material, a specter haunting the narrative. The documentary hints at a vault of additional recordings, private gatherings, behind-the-scenes interactions, moments with high-profile figures who have remained silent. The implication is electrifying. If what's public is this damaging, the hidden material could trigger a seismic shift in perception, accountability, and reputation. 50 Cent's role remains quiet but pivotal. He doesn't need to comment or defend. He lets Combs' own voice carry the story, weaponizing decades of self-documentation. Timing, sequence, and selection of footage are precise, creating a relentless narrative arc, a public reckoning orchestrated by the very rival Combs underestimated. By the closing episodes, the narrative crystallizes into a lesson on power and vulnerability. Combs' obsession with documenting everything, once meant to preserve control, has become the very mechanism of exposure. The empire built on perception is crumbling under the weight of recorded reality. And yet, questions linger. How much remains unreleased? Who else could be implicated by these recordings? Will Combs' legal and personal battles ever fully resolve? The series ends not with answers, but with suspense, leaving viewers contemplating the scope of the fallout and the consequences for those caught in the orbit of influence. The final message is unmistakable. Crowns don't come free. Power carries costs. Legacies are fragile. And the reckoning? It isn't coming anymore. It's already here. So, as viewers, the takeaway is clear. Watch closely, stay aware, and consider the shadows behind every empire. Because in a world of influence, ego, and ambition, the most damning revelations are often self-recorded, and the fallout is unstoppable.